I'd like to welcome you to our second broadcast from the Warrington Borough Council around the COVID situation. I want this evening to give you the opportunity to understand the COVID situation in our town since our last broadcast on Friday, update you on the enhanced restrictions which come into force at midnight tonight, and then focus on jobs, employment in our economy and how that's been affected by COVID. I'm joined tonight by Tara Raj, our Director of Public Health, Councillor Russ Bowden, the Leader of the Council, and by Steve Park, who leads on the economy as our Director of Growth. The session will last about half an hour, and then when the presentations have been made, will there be an opportunity for questions and answers. So to get us going, can I turn to you, Tara, to give us an update on the latest position, anything you want to say about the enhanced restrictions that operate from midnight tonight?
Okay, so I bet you there's some anxious people out there. We are unfortunately in a worse position than we were when we did the broadcast on Thursday. The last 7 days we've had over 200 cases, and our 14-day incidence rate is over 200 per 100,000. Do you remember we talked about whether if we quadrupled we would have overtaken Bolton? Well, if Bolton had stayed the same, we would be in that position. So after a couple of months when we had very low numbers of hospital admissions, unfortunately our local hospitals are now starting to report an increase in numbers of COVID admissions. So this is worrying. The new rules, and they are rules, regulations, the legislation that we are going to be introduced at midnight tonight, include the following. So you can't visit other households, and other households can't visit you. Hospitality for food or drink will be table service only. There will be late night restrictions on leisure, entertainment and hospitality venues, with venues needing to be closed between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. There are additional control measures that are advisory, so not legal, but more advisory, and that's that public transport shouldn't be used except for essential travel, for example, going to school or work. And we're encouraged not to have spectators at amateur or semi-professional sports. So, you know, this is going to be quite difficult, and we'll keep this under review. In addition to these restrictions, we're advising that you should not visit friends or family in care homes other than in exceptional circumstances. Care homes should restrict visits to these in these circumstances. That's a very it's something that's actually going to be in the regulations. That's upsetting for a lot of people, I know. The other restriction is that wearing face coverings in schools when you're not socially distancing is going to be in those new regulations. So these are going to come into force tonight at midnight, and that means big changes for a lot of people. It's going to be a challenge. Most of us rely on parents. We rely on people to help out with childcare and to support us. If they're in your bubble, that's okay. And my understanding is that there may be some relaxation of the rules around whether you can have your parents or others looking after your children. But as yet, I haven't had any official announcement. It's just been trailed. If you have any more questions, we're trying to keep up with the frequently asked questions on our website. So please search Warrington Council Coronavirus for more information. Remember, the main thing that's going to get us through is good infection prevention control. So, you know, washing your hands, making sure you've got your face covering on when you can't socially distance, and keeping that social distance, the space. If you have one or more symptoms, high temperature, a persistent cough, loss of normal taste or smell, book a test immediately if you can get one, but still try and book a test. I'm going to pause there and hand over to Steve.
Okay, thanks very much, Tara. Now move to Steve Parker, who's an update on what the council has done so far in terms of supporting the economy and jobs. And much more work to be done, isn't there, Steve?
Certainly, Stephen. Thanks so much for that. Before I just touch on some of the work that's been done in the council, I think I'd like to start by just pointing out that businesses really just want clarity. It's from clarity that they can plan, they can flex and innovate, and ultimately gain the confidence to either rehire staff for their operations or include investments in the businesses to secure the future. At the minute, there is a bit of a lack of clarity, so I understand a lot of anxiety that's out there with business. It's certainly undermined business confidence in large parts of the economy in Warrington, and to some extent, I think it's been the biggest battle that they've had to face. But despite the ongoing battle, Warrington's economy remains broadly resilient, as it has proven to be so many times in the past, either with the recent uncertainty through Brexit or before that the economic crash, which was just about a decade ago now. So I'm confident that once again our economy will bounce back, and the entrepreneurial spirit that's so evident across business sectors in Warrington will be the key to winning that battle. You've no doubt heard of the restrictions coming into force tonight from midnight, as Tara's just pointed out, and that prevents those hospitality-based businesses from opening beyond 10 p.m. and they must offer a waiter or table service. And it's important that businesses understand that these measures are being implemented by way of regulation and are enforceable in law. And later this week, on Thursday of this week, I should say, the NHS contact tracing gap launches. Many businesses, not just those in the hospitality sector, by the way, they must display a QR code and a poster to assist scanning by customers who are visiting their premises. Now, as you pointed out, Stephen, that the council's worked incredibly hard with our partners such as the Town Centre Business Improvement District and the Local Enterprise Partnership to support local businesses where at all possible. Since the start of the pandemic, the council's issued over £36 million in grants to small businesses, especially those operating in hospitality, which are some of the hardest hit in the economy. And we've issued nearly £2.5 million in discretionary grants to businesses who fall outside of the government's eligibility criteria. We've also overseen the implementation of the business rates retail relief scheme, which itself has amounted to over £40 million in support. So that's over £80 million in rates relief and grants that's gone into Warrington's economy in the last 6 months. Now, the government's furlough scheme has been tapering away in recent weeks, and it will finish by the end of October, which is undoubtedly going to mark a key milestone in Warrington's economic recovery journey. And of course, there's lobbying taking place asking for the Chancellor to extend those furlough arrangements. But again, with only a matter of weeks remaining, there's no certainty on the outcome of this. And there'll be few support schemes that can ever really match the effectiveness of the furlough scheme, but there are some new support programmes coming along very soon. About a week from now, the Local Enterprise Partnership opens its COVID recovery grant scheme for SMEs, and this will give businesses the opportunity to access up to £5,000 in funding for consultancy type support for business. So do please go to their website and to obtain further details. And I'd actually encourage all businesses, large and small, to check out the Cheshire and Warrington Growth Hub website as a trusted source of advice and guidance across a range of matters, but particularly COVID. You can also find guidance on the websites for the council and the Business Exchange and the Business Improvement District. Now, some of the hardest hit in the workforce have been those aged 16 to 24, and there'll soon be a new scheme called the Kickstart Programme. And Warrington and Co at the council, they're going to be a local coordinator for this. So this will see government grant funding being available to businesses willing to take on a young person and offer them training. So we should have some further information on this in the next week or two. Now, I've had a question posed to me from Mark in Padgate, and he's asked, so I can visit the pub, but not somebody else's household, is that right? Well, the short answer is yes, it is right, but I think the thinking behind this from governments is that they've got some pretty strong scientific evidence that has demonstrated that some outbreaks and some significant increases in COVID positive tests has been as a result of family get-togethers, particularly large families coming together. So it's understandable that government is looking to implement some form of restriction in that respect. But at the same time, the government is very keen not to harm the economy where it can avoid it if it possibly can. So I think that's where that policy thinking has come from. I agree with you, Mark. It does seem a little nonsensical at times when you think about the background and the rationale to the reason why the government have promoted that policy. Then it's something that we're going to have to work with because it ultimately is important for the safety of the vulnerable and for the local economy. So with that, Steve, I'll hand back to yourself.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much for that update. And now I'll move to Councillor Russ Bowden, as leader of the council. Russ, please.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and thanks to colleagues for their contributions. I think tonight, the place I'd want to start is obviously with the restrictions coming into play tomorrow, and really to emphasise that we've all got a role to play, and we need everyone to play their part to help stop the spread of the virus here in Warrington. Of course, it's not just about Warrington. These new regulations affect other areas of the northwest and Lancashire. But we're also seeing today in national news that the government is clearly worried about the spread of coronavirus across the country, about the increase in case numbers. And so, I think we're probably heading towards these kind of enhanced restrictions coming in more widely in the UK. But it's still within our grasp, really, to lessen that spread here in Warrington and to avoid us potentially having further restrictions. And I was contacted, as you can imagine, bombarded at times with questions from residents over the weekend after the announcement from last Friday. And really to pick up on the point made by Steve Park, sometimes it does seem like there's contradiction in the regulations and the restrictions that are being put in place, and I recognise that. But clearly, what the government is trying to do is to introduce that small subset of measures which are going to have the best probable and possible impact in the short term, and that job is obviously around reducing the spread of coronavirus here in Warrington and elsewhere. We already know it's been a difficult period. I talked about that last Thursday. The last 6 months has been difficult for us all. And I suppose it's that case of when you start to see those restrictions being relaxed, with people going back to school and university and more people going into the workplace, I guess it was almost inevitable that there would be some initial increase in cases. And obviously what we need to do is to make that manageable, both in terms of protecting people, but obviously around protecting the economy, and also obviously protecting our frontline in terms of health service and support that is being provided. We've moved on a long way. Hospitals are getting back to some sense of normality, and so we obviously got to ensure that any capacity is retained within the system. So it has been difficult for Warrington. It has been for many others, but I guess the real challenge is obviously with winter coming, we need to act urgently. And of course, in a winter setting, people tending to spend more time indoors. Obviously, that's worrying in terms of spread of coronavirus in the community. So going back to last Friday, I certainly welcome the restrictions that were being proposed by government. We've worked closely with the government and Public Health England and the Department of Health and Social Care, as well as our local partners here in the region. So we believe those restrictions are tough, but they are necessary, and they really do build on the guidance that we introduced last week. Another part of my post bag over the weekend was in terms of what's guidance and what's legislation, and a lot of confusion at times, which I think probably hasn't been helped by some mixed messages from government. I think my response to that would be, we don't need to have legislation in order to do the right things. And so, for example, the rule of 6, yes, you could go and meet with other households in a pub or a restaurant. I would always say to people that it's your choice to do so. You know, if you're not comfortable with that situation, then of course don't go. But our best advice would be that you don't mix in those situations, because we're trying to protect people and restrict the increase in cases here locally. So whilst there are rules that are set down in law, there's also some good guidance and advice that's been offered both by the government and also by the council, and you'll find that on our website. So fundamentally, I think Warrington residents need to take some responsibility for their actions and to do what they believe to be the right thing. And I think in everybody's day-to-day lives, we know what those correct things are. We know how to keep ourselves safe, and we know the context for our families and those potentially vulnerable people, perhaps elderly relatives, for example, that we have a responsibility to them to manage our situation accordingly. So, as I said, you know, don't just rely on legislation. Do the things that you know are right. Follow those really simple principles regarding use of face coverings, maintaining social distancing from others, and obviously maintaining very good personal hygiene. And those are really important aspects in terms of controlling the spread, as mentioned by Tara. And it also means that if we do have symptoms, that we act responsibly, that we get a test done, and that if that test is positive, then we ensure that we isolate ourselves in order to play our part and not just add to the increasing number of cases here in Warrington. I'll hand back to you, Stephen.
So, Scott, thank you very much for that contribution. Now move to questions. The first question is from Martin in Birchwood to myself. Martin asks, what is the current testing situation? Well, Martin, I have to say very sadly, it's not been very good. We were promised a world-beating system, and this system has not appeared. And we've still got some major issues, which I know the government are very focused on trying to now solve. One of which, of course, is the capacity in laboratories. So when you've had your test, it has to go off to be dealt with and processed. And they are discovering there's a problem with laboratories. We've been talking to government about this issue, and we've also managed to negotiate a testing site which will come to Warrington, will be permanent in Warrington later this week, and you'll be able to book online and be able to have your test. But of course, this is a system-wide approach. If you can get the test but you can't get it processed, there's a problem. We'll continue to talk to both our MPs about trying to improve the testing facilities. It's important, of course, you don't clog up the testing system if you just have a sniffle or a cold. You've got to really have the COVID symptoms in order to go and book a test. And we'll just encourage people to make sure that they are doing that. So there have been problems. We've been very, very vocal about this to government, making sure that they deliver the world-beating system that we were promised. It's been that difficult. Some people have called this trace the test because they can't easily get a test, but we will continue to work on it. So I'll now move to Tara. A question for Tara, please. This is from Hannah Mottier and many others. What if I normally work in other people's households? Am I still allowed to go into other people's homes? Tara.
Yes, absolutely. So we've heard from decorators, mobile hairdressers, gardeners and cleaners. And yes, if you normally work in somebody else's home or private garden, you can continue to do so. But make sure you're socially distanced, make sure you're having good hand hygiene and wear a face covering, and keep your distance beyond at all times. You can also visit other households, and this is all going to come in the regulations that are being introduced at midnight. You can attend a birth at the mother's request, visit a person who is dying, fulfill a legal obligation, provide education or training, provide care or emergency assistance to someone, continue existing arrangements for access to and contact with children who you may not live with, who are in the same household as a parent. So these are exemptions, and also just to clarify the announcement I think is that was made earlier in the day about childcare. It is relating to people who are 14 and under. So I think if you're under 14, for formal and informal childcare, that's been exempted for going into people's households. Yeah, it's challenging, but keep doing what you're doing. I don't think we're doing anything wrong. We just keep doing it and we'll get through this.
Okay, Tara, thanks very much for that. Last question is from Sharon in Woolston, and many other people have asked this same question. So it's a question for you, Russ, please. How long will the restrictions actually be in place for?
Well, initially in discussions with government, we were certainly talking about 2 weeks and then having weekly reviews after that. I think the simplest answer is that those restrictions will be in place for as long as they're needed, and that's subject to further review and discussions with government as we progress. And obviously, the key benchmark for that is going to be the number of new cases of COVID-19 in Warrington as we move forward. These measures are there to arrest the increase and to get back to a position that we're in just some few weeks ago in terms of a manageable number of new cases here in the Warrington community. Obviously, our priority is about protecting people's lives, and obviously, in terms of the measures that have been introduced, trying to protect businesses and jobs and our local economy here. And we'll continue to review that situation with government and with our partners on a regular basis. I can't really stress enough that these measures are designed to help us bring down our case numbers and to do that as quickly and effectively as possible. And that's got to be the target for all of us, not just for the council and partners. I mentioned earlier about today's national update. We're seeing a rise in cases across the country, and we obviously don't know yet what the government's intentions are, whether they'll be needing us to adopt stricter measures going forward and on a much wider geographical footprint than Warrington and Merseyside. And that could come through in the next few days and weeks, for example. What I can say, though, right now, as a town and a borough, we can all play our part to avoid any further restrictions by following the new legislation, by following the guidance that we're given by government and our own advice to the council, by taking responsibility and all continuing to do the right thing. Warrington has done a great job over the last 6 months. We just need everyone to step up and play their part once again. Thank you.
Okay, Russ, thank you, Tara, thank you, Steve. We will be delivering another broadcast very, very shortly. I hope you find this information and broadcasts are useful for you. Thank you very much and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.